Alfred Gwynn Vanderbilt was involved in thoroughbred racing during 7 decades of the 20th century and contributed to the game in ways that continue to benefit to this date. Vanderbilt was born in 1912 in London and was raised in Lenox, Massachusetts by his mother, Margaret Emerson. It was the Emerson family that built the Maryland farm that became Sagamore, which young Vanderbilt inherited on his 21st birthday. Under Vanderbilt's direction, Sagamore evolved into a legendary breeding and racing operation that continues to flow in contemporary bloodlines. An anchor of that legacy was Discovery, a Vanderbilt purchase and the first handicap champion to win such honors when formal voting began in 1936. Discovery won 22 stakes races, including the Whitney and Brooklyn 3 times each in succession, and was elected to the Hall of Fame in 1969. Retired to Sagamore Farm, Discovery sired 25 stakes winners, one of which was the filly Miss Disco, bred by Vanderbilt. She became the mother of Bold Ruler, sire of Triple Crown winner Secretariat, and one of the greatest stallions of the 20th century. His line survives through A.P. Endy, the son of Triple Crown winner Seattle Slew. At this time, while in his 20s, Vanderbilt became director at Pimlico and worked to bring about the famous match race between Seabiscuit and Triple Crown winner War Admiral in 1938. In 1940, Vanderbilt became president of the Westchester Racing Association, the operator of Belmont Park, and helped bring the pari-mutuel era to New York. He then left racing to serve his country as a PT boat commander in the Pacific during World War II, earning a Silver Star for bravery. Vanderbilt's thoroughbred masterpiece was the immortal Native Dancer, a foal of 1950 who won 4 stakes in 26 days as a 2-year-old at Saratoga: the Flash, Special, Grand Union, and Hopeful. His other major victories included the Wood Memorial, Preakness, Belmont, and Travers. His only defeat was by the slightest of margins in the Kentucky Derby, as he won 21 of his 22 lifetime starts. Along with his tenure as president of Belmont Park, Vanderbilt was also chairman of the New York Racing Association from 1971 through 1975. Vanderbilt's association with New York racing coincided with decades of Eastern greatness, which was no coincidence. During his final years, Vanderbilt remained present to mingle with friends and fans, talking about the serious issues of the day, whether on the backstretch or in the paddock. Late in life, Vanderbilt enjoyed a glorious moment in 1996 when his Traitor won the Grade 1 Futurity at Belmont Park.
And it is Traitor, he wins by 5! And there he is, the happy owner, the venerable Alfred G. Vanderbilt, the leading owner in the United States in 1935.
It was the final addition to a list of coveted trophies that Vanderbilt won. Vanderbilt attended morning workouts on a daily basis until the day he died, November 12, 1999.
That's wonderful, and it's now my pleasure to ask Alfred Gwynn Vanderbilt III to come up to the podium. I can't help taking a little bit of extra time. I was privileged to know Mr. Vanderbilt late in his life as his eyesight diminished, and my wife and I did an informal survey of his basement, and I will spare you the hour of talking about the glories we found. Mr. Vanderbilt was known for what I think was called a puckish sense of humor, and obviously when you read and own Native Dancer and you're that far from undefeated status and amazing immortality, he was not all that enamored of the Secretariat statue in the Belmont paddock. I was standing there looking at it with him one day, and he said, "You know, there's room on the end to list the horses that beat him." And then in the perfect Vanderbilt squelch, he said, "Or maybe it would take both ends." Anyway, he was a wonderful sportsman. I'm so thrilled that the Gray Ghost is with us in bronze in Saratoga, and now I'll turn this over to Mr. Vanderbilt.
Thank you all, and thank you, Ed Bowen, and thank you to the National Museum of Racing for creating this category, and especially to the Hall of Fame committee. which allows men like my dad to be recognized. I do want to thank Mary Lou Whitney and John Hendrickson for that beautiful statue. It's beautiful and it's touching. I think if you wanted to live a racing life in the 20th century, the life you would have wanted to live was my father's. He was personally a charming guy. He was funny, he was witty, he was down to earth, he'd make you feel good about yourself. He was easy, always quick with a quip, and great fun to be around. From 1923, when his grandfather took him to his first race, to 1999, when he died coming back from the morning workouts, I don't think anybody lived a life that was more deeply ingrained in the sport of racing. He was considered profound by his generation as a young man, and not just a reflection of his ancestry, but of his accomplishments. His father had been one of the most famous Americans of the century and had been one of the greatest horsemen of his time. He was the heir to Cornelius Vanderbilt and a hero of the Lusitania sinking. One of his uncles built Grand Central Terminal, an aunt built the Whitney Museum of American Art, and that was just the generation above him. He enjoyed nationwide fame in a way that is probably only possible in the 1930s and 40s. He grew up with his mother, Margaret Emerson, who sort of patrolled the East Coast in her private rail car going from estate to estate. At St. Paul's School, he was the school bookie, showing his, exhibiting his early interest in the horses. He repeated the practice when he went to Yale. After he lost his father at the age of 3, he was then nearly killed twice, once quite violently. And so when his grandfather took him to the Preakness in 1923, it was his first horse race, and he bet on a horse called Tall Timber, and Tall Timber lost in a head bobber, a screamer at the wire. And then there was an inquiry, and Tall Timber was declared the winner. He said it was the most exciting thing in his life, and it absolutely hooked him on racing. I think he saw the door to the world open up in front of him after all those tough times. The record says he started racing at 21, but he probably started sooner. His grandmother raced while he grew up under her own silks, cerise and white squares. But he almost certainly started working with Bud Stotler, her trainer. And when he took over the farm, he tipped the squares on their sides to create cerise and white diamonds. He had a bedroom set up in one of the barns at Sagamore, so he could be involved in everything. He bought Pimlico when he was only 20 years old. He inherited Sagamore when he was 21. And at 25, he set the greatest match race of the century between Seabiscuit and War Admiral. When World War II intervened, he lost his dream job. He was president of Belmont Park. But he rose to a greater challenge. He fought for his country and brought his men home safely, and he was awarded the Silver Star for bravery under fire. When he returned to racing, he married my mother, proving his bravery yet again. Although he came from one of America's oldest clans, he considered himself a modern man, and he was. He liked to drive himself, often with his chauffeur in the back seat. He had a butler, a wonderful man named Louis Sherry. One day while Louis was waiting for my dad at the track, he struck up a conversation with a couple of men at the rail, and Louis was a Frenchman, and he said, you know, it looks very expensive, horse racing. The next thing my father knew, the butler had 2 horses. I was incredibly lucky to land in my mother's arms. The world my parents occupied was filled with interesting and influential friends, beautiful homes, and wonderful experiences. They really knew everyone who was worth knowing. They knew Amelia Earhart. They knew Ernest Hemingway, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, the Prince of Wales. My father invested in the Broadway shows of George Abbott and Harold Prince, and he would host softball games between his stable hands and, for instance, the cast of West Side Story. One morning when we were very little, before dawn, he drove us out to a railhead in Maryland. And his stable was being moved to the West Coast for the racing season. He had 87 horses in training. They were all being loaded. There were about 125 men there and almost 90 horses. Afterwards, I was told it was one of the largest mobilizations of land animals in North America. My dad's core belief was that the horseman's goal was to breed his best on his own land and to race them to win. He came from the era when insurance costs were negligible, trainers worked for one owner, made a little, jockeys made much less. He never expected to turn a profit on his sport, but he always tried to make it rewarding for everyone who he was involved with. He championed the jockey's cause again and again. His trainers were all wonderful, and I just want to mention them. Bud Stadler, who was his mother's trainer, he said taught him everything. George Poole, Bobby Lake, Mike Freeman, Elliot Birch, Rick Violet, Mary Epler, and Alan Jerkins all worked for him, and he trained his own in between. He was that involved in the sport. He was not a hands-off owner. He was a member of racing's establishment and one of its most ardent critics. But he talked about his career this way. He said there were really three eras, BW, AW, and W. And W stood for Winfrey. And he said the only era when he mattered was during Winfrey. He loved his times in Saratoga and looked forward to the season here every year. He staged epic all-night charades parties, played tennis on the public courts, and went to the racetrack every day. This was his slice of heaven. One day he called me and asked if I could meet him out at Belmont for the fifth race. He said it was a terrible race, he had a bad horse in it, and no chance of winning. So of course I went. And I recognized the two men who brought his horse up. They had both been with him for 40 years. One was a man named Apples, Claude Apley, who had been assistant trainer under Lucien Lauren. And the other one was Harold Washington, who had been his chief of security during the days of Native Dancer. I shook Mr. Washington's hand and noticed that he was missing a couple of fingers. And he said, don't worry about that. He said, that was that big gray horse of your father's that did that to me. He said, the one that should have won the Triple Crown. He said, I went in there at feeding time without the feed bag. And he said, no rookie will do that. But he said, Native Dancer just said, I think I'll have a couple of these fat carrots until my dinner arrives. And then I spoke to Apples, who had been with him 37 years. And I said to him, what was my dad like to work for? He said, I wish I had the money he spent on funerals. And I thought, I don't know what that means. What do you mean by that? He said, well, he said the people on the farm really didn't have all that much. And if someone in your family died, your dad would pay for the funeral. So we went upstairs and we watched his horse run, came in 5th or 6th, I don't remember. But he had wanted me to be there to see that, to see the last time he would bring a horse up with his own men for Maryland. So he was grateful to have lived the life he did and to have enjoyed the extraordinary experiences, the great friendships, and the family, not just his own family, but he considered the racing community his family, the backstretch people especially. His life was a fine race, a fine racing life, perhaps, in my opinion, the finest ever. So I thank the National Museum of Racing, and I thank you all very much.